probably seems fitting to start one of these types of videos out with the very thing that I personally love to fall asleep to, the Looney Tunes. The history of the Looney Tunes goes on and on just about as long as they have gone on and on and on and on. I've been a big fan of Looney Tunes since I probably started watching TV. But oh boy, is there a chockload of lore and history. These are just little theories, little facts, little things that have a lot of bizarre connections, but they all connect back to the Looney Tunes. So one thing that's funny is Bugs Bunny is your titular character that goes, yeah, what's up, Doc? Turns out his voice actor, the famous Mel Blanc, has a hatred of carrots. That every time that he finished a take with the chewing of the carrots for Bugs's catchphrase, he would just go, I mean, not everybody's carrot people, and to think that the famous actor voicing a character who loves carrots hates carrots, it's kind of hilarious. He won't eat carrots, but he will absolutely stand in for any actor that cannot get a certain line across. One of the actors that they worked with very frequently but wasn't credited for a long time was Arthur Q. Bryan, the voice of Elmer Fudd. In 1957, when they worked on What's Opera Doc, everything was going well, but Arthur couldn't say one certain word. During the big typhoon, hurricane, earthquakes, smash! You can definitely tell that's Bugs and not Elmer. Another weird thing that I found out that don't think I'd ever really put together. It wasn't until I got the platinum edition of the Looney Tunes to get into the lore of Ralph Phillips. It was first featured in 1957 by Chuck Jones, and he does what, any person would do, or anyone with ADHD would do, and daydream. His first appearance is from A to ZZZZZ, where he daydreams in class, imagining himself as a pilot, explorer, and other things. And then he got into Boyhood Days in 1957, but then there wasn't going to be another Ralph Phillips for quite some time. He has a cameo in Space Jam and has another cameo in the Looney Tunes cartoon Livin' the Daydream, which is a bit of a hilarious full circle moment because his whole spiel is about his having a fantastical imagination in his mind about what he wants to do, and to have a daydream storyline be explored again where he gets to be the cameo involved, it is kind of hilarious. And for the most of it, Ralph Phillips, not a bad little thing to get into. It's a funny little side mission adventure that the Looney Tunes company went through. So this isn't really pertaining to Looney Tunes, but it does have to do with the influence. Christopher Walken has gone on to say that most of his performances are based off of Bugs Bunny, but he will not tell which one is based off of Bugs Bunny. So another short to talk about is probably one of my favorites, and that's Invasion of the Bunny Snatchers, which has been hailed as one of the scariest cartoons. I would say it's spooky, but not scary. It's very morbid when you look at it, but it is kind of a first for a lot of things. This was the first time that Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Yosemite Sam, Elmer Fudd, and Porky Pig are all in the same animation short. It's a sausage fest, but usually a lot of them exist either in different pairings. Like you have Bugs and Porky for one, or you have Bugs and Daffy for one, or you have Porky and Sylvester for one. This is a different venture to kind of get the most out of it, to make it feel more like it's parody of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. But as much as this is a first, it's also a last of only 4 Warner Brothers cartoons in which Bugs Bunny is pitted against 3 of his main antagonists: Yosemite Sam, Elmer Fudd, and then his sometimes best friend but also pain in the ass Daffy Duck. The previous 3 were This Is Life from 1955, A Star Is Born in 1956, and then Blooper Bunny in 1991. In one of the close-ups, the fake Daffy's mouth is replaced with a video recording of a human mouth lip-syncing the lines. It is called Synchrovox, which is the same used for the series Clutch Cargo, which, it's not exactly the greatest, but Pulp Fiction referenced it, so there's that. They also went as far as to make a real-life reference when Yosemite Sam says, "Help, I've fallen and I can't get up!" And it's like, where have I heard that before? What famous line is that from? Like, I even need to tell you guys. And if that wasn't enough on the references, it ends with a reminiscent artwork of Terry Gilliam's animations of Monty Python, which a lot of people kind of saw immediately, like, okay, so you had to do Clutch Cargo and now you're doing one of the best ones ever. The Looney Tunes has a bit of a unspoken reputation that you have to have a one-man show. Mel Blanc did virtually all the voices for the characters, but over time, after Mel Blanc's passing and trying to figure out, well, who can you pass the torch to, and it got hard to find somebody that could do a one-man show like Mel Blanc did. That fell eventually to Eric Bauza, who has taken on the role of many of the characters in the same fashion Mel Blanc did. So I have to confess that one of my favorite Looney Tunes spin-offs of their originals that took on a life of their own is Duck Dodgers. And if you look at the way that this cartoon came together, you'd be surprised how many people said yes to this. There's a hilarious coincidence that's involved with the woman who was the voice of the Martian Queen, Tia Curry, who we all know as, well, a couple of things, either True Lies or Nani from Lilo and Stitch. You're either going to see her as the sister who is absolutely fucking done, or the Martian Queen that secretly has the hots for Duck Dodgers. This woman has a strange range, and I am okay with that. Another part of Duck Dodgers that I absolutely love, and I'm sure a lot of other people do, is Tom Jones providing the opening theme to Duck Dodgers. And this man did not have to go 110%, but that's just what Tom Jones did. You can definitely tell where the inspiration came from of a familiar project he did, a little Bond movie called Thunderball. And if you listen to the opening and then you listen to Thunderball and tell, okay, I see where the inspiration came from, but still, who can say no to Tom Jones' songs? Probably one of the biggest and most favorable animation accomplishments is still Who Framed Roger Rabbit, among many other projects, but when are you ever going to get Warner Brothers and Disney characters on the same screen without copyright having to get the other person? And the deal was for the movie that every character has to have the same amount of screen time. Even if one goes off screen, the other one needs the same amount of time. Same thing for Daffy Duck and Donald doing their little bit in the bar. But Disney ended up winning over Warner Brothers in the end. When Eddie Valiant is falling, Mickey Mouse is shown just a few seconds before Bugs, and there's not an allotment of screen time. But ironically, Robert Zemeckis went in on this movie with Steven Spielberg, who did help with something called Tiny Toons. That is just basically Looney Tunes 2.0. So one thing that I never asked, and it's also been joked about, is where does Bugs get his origin name from? Like, that's a very unique name to give a bunny rabbit character. And it's not referring to an insect or some of the other various things like Bugsy Malone, like Bugsy being a name. It's kind of wondering, in the 1950s, 1940s mentality, was that how we got his name? Yes and no. Bugs is a common nickname for someone who is bug-eyed and shifty, which is basically Bugs Bunny, which does make sense about his namesake. But still, it was kind of a hilarious way to find out his origin story is accurate and also different than what I thought. In 1960 to 1975, Bugs Bunny got his own show, and that's... Hold on a second. So I actually found out that there is a slight timeline adjustment. There was one that came out in 1948, and then that's where the other Bugs Bunny one comes in. Okay, continue. Probably where we know most of the most favorable Bugs Bunny cartoons. And it is ranked in the top 250 TV shows of all time at 185. That's pretty good to still be on something that has the same list of Breaking Bad and Gravity Falls and many other very accomplishing television shows that, Bugs still has a place on there. But during that time period, there was a lot more that went into this and marked a lot of firsts and finals. The animated show marked the last Billy Fletcher animation role, who had a big part to play because where you look at Bugs Bunny falling in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, that's a lot of years to be a part of this whole Warner Brothers world. And this is something else I found, that during the opening credits of the parade of characters, you have Tweety Pie, Speedy Gonzales, Hippity Hop, Yosemite Sam, Sylvester the Cat, Elmer Fudd, Pepe Le Pew, Wile E. Coyote, Foghorn Leghorn, and then follows the re-entry of Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. But you know who's not there? The Roadrunner, which is kind of for another reason. Not just because Roadrunner is very much entirely existing in the Wile E. Coyote universe, and that's kind of where he's at, but that's also where he's at. During that time, he was given his own separate introduction when the show was renamed the Bugs Bunny and Roadrunner Hours. So he wasn't tossed aside, he was just given his own spotlight, which I'm sure Wile E. was pissed about, but that's just who Wile E. Coyote is. He's always wily about that. But then there was more that they want to do with Bugs and insert character here. They had the Bugs Bunny show, and then they had the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner Hour, and then they had the Bugs Bunny and Tweety show, because of course you have to give the most pissant character of Putty Cats his own show. And then finally there was the Bugs Bunny Looney Tunes Comedy Hour, where they really got to get everybody involved, and they're not just going to be a mentioned side characters, because none of them want to have it that way, especially Daffy. And then recently, Bugs Bunny Builders. It's almost like they took the Bugs Bunny idea with Bob the Builder. That's a very weird way to have to explain that, but that's literally what I'm reading here. They're just building things, which is hilarious considering these are very destructive characters in the beginning, so maybe some Acme insurance was starting to breathe down their shirt collars. I mean, they could just absolutely blink and something would explode. And we all know that the whole Coyote versus Acme thing is going on, so I'm sure the Looney Tunes are trying to make sure that they don't keep getting themselves into a lot of destructive scenarios. But it is very visually unique about how they make this. Like, if you were to put Bugs Bunny with a whole bunch of characters that make things, you would want to see the things that they would make would be a reflection on who they are and what they do and the kind of fun they stand for. Someone obviously wanted to make this happen in a right way, and they are my hero. So I have to admit, one of my guilty pleasure and childhood favorites of the Looney Tunes series was Baby Looney Tunes. I did not miss an episode. I loved what they did with the infantile versions of the characters and getting to see them, especially where you've got introduced these characters that are so dark in their humor, so to see something extremely lighthearted would almost seem like an insult, but they truly do make it work considering this is aimed for preschoolers. This was the first preschool television program from Warner Brothers, and they didn't really do a whole lot of those that worked. And despite not having the regular cast members or the regular directors, Chuck Jones still did get behind this, and so did one of the main staples of the Looney Tunes universe, June Foray, is ironically the only American on that set, and everyone else was Canadian, so this is a Canadian preschool production. That is a really weird way to define that show now. So at this point, most of the Looney Tunes has had a release, whether it lives on VHS, DVDs, and mostly streaming, but since we live in the world of streaming, it's kind of where we have to find most of it. But the key word here is most. Some of them have never gotten the streaming confirmation, and there are some that have just never been released or available in general. One of those is the Looney Tunes Hall of Fame, an hour and 45 minutes of 15 classic Looney Tunes cartoons. And you can't find it anywhere. Has never been released, only lived probably vicariously through some showings on television, but other than that, you either saw it or it was not there and gone forever. You literally had to be at the right place and right time to catch some of these characters. There are some I know I've seen on TV and I've never seen it gone to home media or streaming. So funny enough, there has always been some sort of reference to Batman as far back to the 1940s. And also, funny enough, Daffy is usually the one that references Batman. Batman! Strange coincidence or not, that's still hilarious. But in 1981, there was a movie called the Looney Bugs Bunny movie. And in Act 2, called The Unmentionables, the two policemen from the court are named Clancy and O'Hara. And these two female detectives are based off of the officer Clancy O'Hara from the 1966 Batman series. I don't know how or why they didn't get the Adam West to be in there, because that would have been a hilarious full circle moment, but eventually we might get an actual Batman in one of the Bugs Bunny cartoons. And maybe Daffy would be the one to say it, I don't know. He was Batman for one episode. Another first for the Looney Tunes comes in 2011 when the Looney Tunes show came out. It is one of the first Looney Tunes series to be rated TV PG. I mean, let's face it, Looney Tunes has been needing some PG probably since the first tune came out. But since this does deal with some more adult jokes and they're on Cartoon Network, you can't play with fire that much, and things were starting to be looked upon a little bit more closely of what children were watching, so I can say they just threw that PG up there just to make things safe. But the show also had a first edition to give Daffy a girlfriend. God bless that female duck for what she has to put up with, because let's face it, no one wants to date Daffy. I don't know what in the world Tina did, but Tina is probably one of the most successful characters that was never seen or heard from again. She is basically the Daryl Dixon of the Looney Tunes show to just exist there. Whereas Lola Bunny had a life after Space Jam, Tina never did. And that's kind of sad, because that was a very enjoyable character that was able to not match Daffy's craziness, but actually make him calm the fuck down more. The patience that Tina has needs to be studied. But the show also had a really unique tidbit to Daffy Duck's history. In the show, there's an episode called Best Friends where Daffy's birthday is April 17th. And this is because the debut of Daffy Duck was April 17th, 1937. 89 years ago. And as one little last tidbit that is very Zodiac inspired, this was released on the year of the rabbit from the Chinese calendar in the Chinese New Year. So to find out that this had to come out for the year of the rabbit for a rabbit show, that's just a nice touch. So one of my personal favorite Daffy Duck cartoons is hands down Robin Hood Daffy. I know Cary Elwes was a great Robin Hood, and of course Errol Flynn is so good at that he had to constantly make cameos, like in Rabbit Hood. Disney did a good Robin Hood, but Robin Hood Daffy. They just don't make certain Robin Hood adaptations of comedy, before we had a great one with Men in Tights. But the song that Daffy sings is set to the tune of the 17th century ballad, Come Lasses and Lads. His lyrics are loosely based off of that first verse. Come lassies and lads, leave of your dads, and away to the Maypole High. For every fair has a sweetheart there, and the fiddler standing by. For Willie shall dance with Jane, and Johnny has got his Joan to trip it, 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 trip it. You get it, And then there's the other song that Porky sings, The Ballad of Barbara Allen, which funny enough, I had never seen until recently when I got the Platinum edition of the Looney Tunes. And for that one, Porky does not have a stutter. That man does not miss a beat. That must be his song to make sure that he doesn't become a scat man. So we're going to be going back onto some of the dudes behind the tunes. I feel like it's common now that you have people that have worked for numerous companies as long as they get to be in the world of animation. And one of those few people was John W. Dunn He was a writer for The Magical World of Disney from 1955 until 1963, and after that, a lot of his works went right to the Warner Brothers. He was in charge of Quackbusters, he was in charge of Happy Birthday Bugs, Chuck-a-Muck, the Bugs Bunny and the Tweety Show. I mean, there was not something that he worked on in the world of the Looney Tunes, kind of like a secret anchor for one of the ways that Looney Tunes has been kept alive, and he kept working on them until the day he died. His last credit is Daffy Duck's Fantastic Island. But there's also some more stuff I did learn about that movie that sent me down a very interesting rabbit hole for this movie. It truly has some frickin' names to it, despite just being, a Daffy Duck movie. This wasn't just the final film of John W. Dunn, but this was Friz Freeling's final film too, and he's the biggest name in Warner Brothers during that time and has credits out the wazoo for how he made a big part of the Looney Tunes happen. But another person that almost had a hand in this movie but turned it down, and I can see why, because the name just speaks for itself, Orson Welles. I mean, he said yes to Transformers, but no to Looney Tunes. Can't win them all. Another Daffy Duck production with big names is in Daffy Duck's Quackbusters, which I already previously mentioned, but going into this, it's kind of funny how big the names are in this one. On top of Mel Blanc always voicing Daffy Duck, Mel Torme had a turn. Yeah, the guy that Harry Stone is always obsessed with on Night Court, that one played Daffy Duck. The things you learn. But on top of that, B.J. Ward, aka Velma Dinkley. So that means we had an early Scooby-Doo kind of crossover with Bugs Bunny. That is some hilarious pull right there. But this is also a film of many lasts. It is the last film to feature Mel Blanc. This is one of the last few features he did before he passed away, one of those being Who Framed Roger Rabbit, with his death in July 10th, 1989. But because it was getting near the end, they used a majority of his archived screams, screeches, yells, anything that was a blank statement, so to speak. But because at that point, he can't yell anymore, so they gotta improvise a whole lot. So a lot of that improvising also went to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. But not only was it the last Mel Blanc production, it was the last production to have both a theatrical and non-theatrical rating of G by the Motion Picture Association. So at that point, that rating started to get a little bit complicated after 1989. So as a Looney Tunes fan, you've got to ask yourself one thing. When was the last time I saw a Looney Tunes movie at the movies? Because if you look at their history, they've only existed in shorts, Space Jam, or live action movies like Looney Tunes Back in Action. There was a big hype over Coyote vs. Acme coming out, only for it to be written as a tax write-off by Warner Brothers. And around that time, they had another film that was supposed to come out called The Day the Earth Blew Up in 2024. But Warner Brothers was so impressed that there was such a tight budget made for something that definitely looked like it cost a lot more money, and decided, hey, why not? We'll stream it on the streaming service Max. But Warner Brothers Discovery passed on the release, deciding to just cancel the film, just like Coyote vs. Acme. But that's where a little saving grace called Ketchup Entertainment comes in and bought the rights to The Day the Earth Blew Up to have it have a theatrically released in theaters, as well as reviving the original tax write-off of Coyote vs. Acme. But this film had a major help from someone else who worked for a different company that didn't even tell said company he was working on this movie. Eric Urquhart, I hope I got his name right, is a full-time employee at a little place called DreamWorks Animation, something that has little to no involvement with the Looney Tunes, considering that's Warner Brothers. But because this went to Ketchup Entertainment, there was a little bit of some flexibility to do some moonlighting work onto this movie. And this was the first hand-drawn animated film working with a close-knit group of collaborators that worked on other projects. But because this is considered an indie project, you can get people from different places and just have fun and work together. It was the first time that you're able to grab people and work on a project. And man, does it show. The whole movie does look like it is a secret project. So you have help from Ketchup Entertainment, you have help from someone who worked at DreamWorks, and you also have someone who helped out from a show called Super Jail. Christy Caracas worked on the film as a part of the visual department, which makes even more sense why it's so visually striking. Now, big thing to know, this specific movie does have correlation with the Looney Tunes cartoons that came out in 2019, where you already had preset actors that could just launch into the project that they've already been working on. But since this is in the hands of a different company, unfortunately you couldn't really get the people to step away from the project they're currently working on to go do another project. There just wasn't the time. So Bob Bergen, who usually is the voice of Porky Pig, had to be replaced by, well, someone you can always rely upon who's been doing it for quite some time, Eric Bauza. To think this was just going to be a movie they were just going to have as a tax write-off ended up becoming the turning point to bring back Coyote vs. Acme. Kind of makes this more of an important film to the Looney Tunes history. In 1964, the Porky Pig show came out, where finally one of the other characters, other characters, got their own spiel. It was kind of hard to ignore someone who had such a standout voice that wasn't Bugs or Daffy. It had someone who wasn't mischievous and kind of fell victim to the circumstances around, which does make it very entertaining to see, okay, how is this plucky pork gonna get out of here? And for what it's worth, they did a lot of unique pairings until something just finally stuck. But what they put out in 1964 was a collection of the various shorts that he shared with the various characters like Daffy and Sylvester. The list goes on. But in 1969, the 78 shorts that were televised together on the show went through different airings. Sometimes they would call it Porky Pig and Friends instead of the Porky Pig Show, but like I just said, Porky isn't really by himself. They just want to make him look a little bit special, but unfortunately some people are like, yeah, no, that's the reason why he's the other character. He's just an accessory. What can we say? But at least he's a good, ending note. So when the Looney Tunes would come out, it would either be compilation sets or they would have new shorts altogether. Just go ahead and shell them out all in one go and give them hot on the presses. And in 1980, they did that with Bugs Bunny for a TV special called Bugs Bunny's Bustin' Out All Over. I really wish they redid that title, but that's what they went for. Upon looking at it, it has a lot of the specials and the shorts that we've seen today, between Portrait of the Artist as a Young Bunny, Spaced Out Bunny, and Soup or Sonic. Sort of in the same way that the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner movie came out, that was just Bugs basically telling about bugs. It's all about bugs. But the Emmy nominees weren't kidding about bugs, and they gave the TV special an Emmy nomination. So whatever shorts were in there was enough to make a long impact to be recognized for an award of that stature. Early in the 1940s, there was another character that had a bit of a harder time to stand out and didn't become one of the main ones, but is a staple of the history, is Beaky Buzzard, which I never really gave this character a name, but I recognized him in other shorts. Some that came out later on, but his first appearance was Bugs Bunny Gets the Boyd. Boyd! Yes, the Boyd. This was in 1942, and this is one that exists in certain classic episodes of the Looney Tunes. There's a mama buzzard that wants her children to learn to bring home their own dinner, so basically become your own DoorDash children. And one buzzard has a hard time. He's kind of shy and kind of bashful, and he gets kicked out of the nest. Parenting 101, baby. And he's told he'd come back and bring a rabbit. And, well, that's where Bugs Bunny comes in. But If you look at the character of Beaky Buzzard, he's had a hard time existing. Between this and then The Bashful Buzzard in 1945, that was a fresh remake that definitely needed to happen. But funny enough, this one is chock full of references that was just going on back in the day in 1941, even so far up into 1920 film range. There's a scene where Bugs believes part of his body is skeletal, is a reference to Harold Lloyd's execution in The Freshman from 1925. There's also a dialogue that says, "Why don't we do this more often?" Like, you mean just what we're doing tonight, are the lyrics of the 1941 song, "Why Don't We Do This More Often?" I mean, goodness Lord, if you're having fun at the job, have fun with your references. Another recognizable piece of 1940s history is Beaky Buzzard's voice and mannerisms are modeled after the radio character and ventriloquist dummy Mortimer Snurd, created by Edgar Bergen. Which, if you're a Roseanne fan, you might recognize that from the 4th season Halloween special. I guess that was just on the range. It had to be in 2 comedic projects. And because he's modeled after this character, they thought, why not name him after that? He was originally given the name the Snurd Bird before acquired the name of Beaky Buzzard. Unfortunately, they just didn't want to mess with that. But still, people get the mannerisms to catch the reference enough, and boy did it work. Because the buzzard hums the song Arkansas Traveler, which was Bergen's theme song on the radio, and people would have recognized that. So it's kind of funny when you're recognizing a character being portrayed to a T in another character that is kind of a nice little honor. But funny enough, you would think with a character that sounds so old, he'd be played by someone that is probably up there in range. Nope. He was done by an 18-year-old Kent Rogers. He was only 18 when he recorded his lines, but unfortunately, he went into military and got killed during the training on a flight accident just short of his 21st birthday. So, damn, man, R.I.P. Kent. Thank you for what you did. You did a great job, and now that character still lives on. But because of the fact that the actor died due to a military accident, there's a bit of a foreboding thing within the episode of Bugs Bunny Gets the Void, is that there are several Air Corps jokes and allusions that were made a part of the cartoon. It was the times, but also it does tug at your shirt collar knowing that someone also died in the military of an accident. It has a bit of a strange parallel to it. Another piece of character trivia goes to Yosemite Sam. Now, it was a big question to wonder, how are you going to make a character so outrageous and crazy and adamant? Well, you have to look at your creators for that. It's no secret that most of the characters are based off of the creators themselves, Chuck Jones and Friz Freleng. And Yosemite Sam is inspired by Friz Freleng. And during the Warner Brothers years, Yosemite Sam ended up becoming a creation among the colleagues at Warner Brothers. And it's because he is short and he has a tendency to just explode in outbursts, so the inspiration was not very far for Yosemite Sam. This guy was such a big deal that in the book That's All Folks, The Art of Warner Brothers Animation, Freleng has the highest number of directed cartoons more than anybody in Warner Brothers animation history. Like, not even Chuck Jones, who has an equally big name as him, and kind of more of a sad name than Frizz's himself, but he's really one of the big powerhouses that made Warner Brothers be the way it is today because somebody put in the work. Oh, and also, he had no formal training in art. So think about that anytime you feel down about yourself, knowing this was a man that had no idea what he was doing and made an impact in history. But then again, I think that's how we make an impact in history. But also, animation circles traveled with a lot of cartoon circles, and one major friendship that was very connected was Chuck Jones's friendship with Dr. Seuss, or Sus, as it is now, apparently. Whenever Chuck Jones had a moment to step away from Bugs and the gang, he did help out with a few of the animated projects that were going to be adapted of Dr. Seuss's stories. And, the most famous we know of is How the Grinch Stole Christmas, but, Chuck really did steal everything about How the Grinch Stole Christmas just from his looks alone. If you look at the Grinch, you see it's very much a Seuss-like creature. You look at the one that Chuck Jones did, and you just see Chuck Jones. And it was commentated by Dr. Seuss by saying, this looks more like you. And Chuck's like, it happens, and just shrugged it off and was like totally okay with the Grinch basically being chucked up. But Friz Freleng also had a hand in Dr. Seuss's other animation adaptations. There was a short-lived production called Marvel Productions, and it was done with David H. DePatie and Friz Freleng's. And one of the things they worked on was the last adaptation of one of Dr. Seuss's TV movies, The Grinch's The Cat in the Hat, coming out in 1982. Friz Freleng also is uncredited as a writer for this, as a lot of people were uncredited because the only credit there for a writer is, well, the doctor himself. It was one of the few non-Looney Tune things that Friz Freleng worked on, amongst other things of the Pink Panther or After School Special, but still, this guy is a huge part of the Looney Tunes history. So if you ever wanted to know who was a big powerhouse in making sure animation stayed on station, it's your Fritz. So one thing about Bugs is, I don't think I ever really considered him an American icon. I think of him as an American cartoon, but he's there. He exists for the chaos and to absolutely make everyone's life a flavor of chaos. But in 1981, they gave him a special called Bugs Bunny, the All-American Hero. Yeah, I got some people that would most definitely disagree about that, but that is okay. It was a primetime episode for 30 minutes that ran some of the cartoons that had a big patriotism plot focus. And man, did those 30 minutes count, because this one also got an Emmy nominee. Technically, it's supposed to be a whole remake or reimagining of Yankee Doodle Bugs, a 7-minute short from 1954, and somehow that paved the way in 1981. You know what, it's okay. You do you, Bugs. Someone clearly loved what was being done here, and sometimes you can strike gold twice. I guess. In 1954, there was an introduction to the Thug characters that had another short-lived run, kind of like Ralph Phillips in his short run, and, well, Beaky Buzzard and his very strange up and down history, popping all over the world. But these guys, they had a short-lived run, but man, did they make it count. The plot of it is Bugs accidentally finds his way into a getaway car by Rocky and Muggsy. And whenever gangsters were made fun of, they did have a fun time making fun of the gangsters. It was hard to not love these characters that you knew were going to be fooled by a rabbit. And it was always fun every single time. But funny enough, this short ended up inspiring a certain guitarist from a band called Rush. Alex Lifeson has a solo album called Victor that contains a track called Shut Up, Shuttin' Up, which references a line from the cartoon. There are Stranger Things. And also 5 seasons of Stranger Things, too. There's a bit of a parallel of cartoons that, if you saw it, you saw. And it was kind of a hilarious in-joke how one finally got back at the other. In 1953, there was a cartoon for Daffy Duck called Duck Amuck, which is hands down hilarious. Anything that has to do with breaking the fourth wall and knowing the power that you have in a pencil. SpongeBob really should have thought carefully, because he did not see Duck Amuck about the power someone can have when they're creating the life of a character. But that vengeance got served in Rabbit Rampage. In 1955, Bugs finds himself arguing with the cartoonist making everything and has no idea why in the world something like that is happening to him. Because karma sucks, Bugs. Karma sucks. But also in the 50s, Daffy had a very unique time being given a backstory because most of that is him married. Man, someone did not tell Tina that he is actually divorced. I hope they're divorced because there is never a mention about Daffy being married again. In 1955, a short called Stork Naked came out. That is also another sentence that has no right to be said like that. A drunken stork comes to the home of Mr. and Mrs. Daffy with their newest bundle of joy, but Daffy is like, no more kids, I am done, it is not happening, and goes to whatever measures to keep the stork away. But in this specific one, Daffy's then wife, never seen again wife, does have a name, Daphne Duck, which is very not creative, but okay, we're in the sake for it, which I love the pun, but I also hate how it rolls off the tongue for being so close to Daffy Duck. I mean, come on, guys. This is why I love Tina more. But on top of this being one of the few shorts that Daffy is married, this is also one of the first that he flies. Since he was only married for a majority of the episodes, only flies for a majority of the episode, I assume Daphne Duck took flying in the divorce. Good for her. But also, this does exist as the biggest commentary about the huge baby boom that was going on in the 1950s. So, those storks were definitely a commentary in themselves. So, what you're telling me is that there were a lot of drunk people delivering babies in the 1950s. Of course not, but still. It's kind of a funny one as well as it's a reflection and a interesting Daffy cartoon. In 1954, a Sylvester cartoon came out called Muzzle Tough, which is obviously a play on the Hebrew term Mazel Tov, which of course means good luck. That ain't here, but you know, it's all we can do. And there is a reference to a very famous store within the short. The character Granny is depicted to live across from a business called R.H. Lacey and Company, which is a pun on the store Macy's. So within the Looney Tunes, there has been numerous depictions of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and as a fan of that horror series and how it can be depicted, the Looney Tunes has always been my favorite. But there was one that Sylvester and Tweety did in 1954, where you see a lot of some interesting horror elements going on here that makes you wonder, we're just a hop, skip, and a jump from being a horror movie. This is the time, this is the place. But the short also decided to go ahead and make itself a double reference by doing another famous horror film that came out within the same decade, The Fly. Which, you know, if you're Looney Tunes, you can definitely make anything possible. 1954 was a busy year. On top of making all of the Looney Tunes cartoons go on, they were still experimenting with other various characters. And Warner Brothers was not afraid to send an answer about monitoring other companies like Disney. At the time, the Chip and Dale characters were going around in Disney, so in response, the Chipmunk duo, they made I Go For You to make the Gopher Twins, named Chip and Dale and Macintosh. But also, Macintosh is a real British term, which is a term for a raincoat. But then in 1960, they're made to be the Goofy Gopher Twins and not polite as seen in 1954. So, they were quite an answer to Disney. I don't know what kind of answer it was, but it is an answer. But it's also not a bad cartoon either. It is very funny for what it is. But then again, if you look at the Chip and Dales, there are also other references to other references. So at this point, it's just becoming an inception. But the Gopher Twins did find other collaborations with other characters. In 1958, Gopher Broke came out, and the puns just keep getting better. That is like peak pun right there. I don't know why I haven't even used that one yet. It's got some hard mixed reviews because the Gopher Twins were a hit or a miss, but Gopher Broke also does have a little bit of its own self-reference, accidental cut, copy, paste when the plot came up similar to a Tom and Jerry cartoon called Year of the Mouse, where Jerry and his friend are pulling practical jokes on a sleeping Tom and drive him nuts. And it's very similar to the plot that Gopher Broke has with Foghorn Leghorn just wanting his peace and quiet, and it's disturbed by the goofy gophers. Well, it just seems to be that mice and chipmunks and gophers are the true annoyance to bigger animals. It's just gonna keep happening. Nothing we can do about that. Now, it appears that the Looney Tunes is in a lot of the hands of many different people from different entertainment industries, different directors, but there are just some times that a dibs is called. Cartoon Network actually did that. In 1991, Bugs Bunny's Lunar Tunes premiered, and it only aired exclusively on Cartoon Network. No other networks had that privilege. If that's ever a diva moment, that's a proud diva moment for Cartoon Network. But, funny enough, it's actually supposed to be a continuation of Spaced Out Bunny from 1981 that brought back Hugo the Abominable Snowman from 1961, because why not? So, believe it or not, there was a dry spell for Daffy Duck stories. From 1968 until 1987, Daffy mostly lived in reruns. And it seems pretty easy to do when he can be paired with any character to be the annoyance of their day. The last episode that was made for him in 1968 was See Ya Later Gladiator, and the return was with The Duxorcist, which is kind of hilarious that the way they reintroduce Daffy Duck stories is having a parody of The Exorcist and Ghostbusters. Oh, and it also has the return of another one of Daffy Duck's love interest made for him. I don't know why they have to keep making women for him, because clearly he does not need one. God help it. No, that duck is not worth it. There was a character named Melissa Duck from The Scarlet Pumpernickel that makes a return in The Duxorcist. So, well, Daffy was married for a period of time, so I guess it wouldn't hurt for him to go back to a former episode fling. But it was unique on how they were able to do a few callbacks to some of the other Daffy Duck stories. One of those was Superior Duck in 1996 to be a remake of the 1956 Stupor Duck. And not only was it a remake, but they used it before a movie called Carpool. Whatever works, that was how the Looney Tunes lived, was being these prototypes for different movies to be like, well, now you have no choice but to sit through a Looney Tune cartoon before your feature presentation. And then it was decided to stretch this out even more into Looney Tunes Back in Action, where the cape of Superior Duck is given to Duck Dodgers during the climax of Looney Tunes Back in Action. I mean, it's a hell of a thing to use a remake that was a prototype for another movie as a pre-entertainment and then launch it into another movie. Well, it is their project, so they can do what they can, and they did what they did. But it's still kind of unique knowing that a cartoon from 1956 would be remade in 1996 and used to pre-set an audience to be entertained, set in the same year, only to be used again for another live-action Looney Tunes property. That is quite the jump and stretch. But there is some hilarious irony when Bugs Bunny had the cape on. This does predate Daffy putting on the cape for his funny Super Daffy in 1956, but in 1943, Bugs was the first one, because we all know Bugs is always the first one, always up on top. It's just who he is, Doc. The parody that they did of Superman was very well received. So well received, in fact, that the short ended up making a bit of some hindsight in the future when DC Comics and Warner Brothers would end up going together. In 1969, the Kinney National Company purchased Superman publisher DC Comics 2 years earlier, and then purchased Warner Brothers as well. And ever since then, Superman has been owned by the Warner Brothers. Well, for a period of time. And in time when Warner Brothers would end up shifting around what some projects went somewhere, Chuck Jones was asked to do a sequel. and eventually was reworked into, well, Superior Duck because Turner Classics had owned the original 1943 short and the merger wasn't done with Time Warner yet. So I guess Bugs was truly out of time. Just the one time, though. Just the one time, I think. Now, we've all known that the very lovely and dearly missed June Foray became one of the biggest voices for many of the female Looney Tunes characters, just emanating the comedy so well that really rises above the sausage party of characters that we have going on. But June did find a way to get her pretty little self into one of the Looney Tunes cartoons. In Broomstick Bunny, when Witch Hazel is magically accidentally transformed into a beautiful, hot Witch Hazel, that is modeled after June Foray herself. So that woman was a snack back then. And she herself confirmed it in the DVD commentary. And it turns out Chuck was chasing her for quite a lot of years, professionally, of course, to get her to voice one of the characters, and finally got her for Witch Hazel. But this also made a new change to how recordings are done for animations. Usually they have them in an individual booth to get the individual recordings, but instead, Chuck Jones had wanted to record her lines in the same room as June, and it ended up proving to be a great decision, obviously, because many recordings had been done with multiple people in a room, but this was one of the first places it started at. So we know Chuck and Fritz were the directors that worked hard on the Looney Tunes, and Mel Blanc is the man that brought the characters to life. But where does the Looney Tunes actually start? Well, that was in 1930 from three people: producer Leon Schlesinger, and the animators Hugh Harmon and Rudolph Ising. Schlesinger was in full production until 1933 when he sold the studio to Warner Brothers Pictures in 1944, and then they renamed it the Warner Brothers Cartoons. So before it became the Warner Brothers, it was a Schlesinger cartoon. But the real idea does stem from one of the longest animated productions, The House of Mouse. Disney made a cartoon called Silly Symphonies, and they looked at that and just went, that sounds a little, loony, and grabbed a whole bunch of people to put them together, and here we are today. Now, with that being such a long time ago, you know there's bound to be some cartoons that, have not aged well, and time is the way it is, and time goes on, but there's no way to escape some of these very famous censored cartoons. In fact, they even have their own list called the Censored 11. And oh boy, some of these are interesting in the public domain. Some of them are, and some of them aren't. First one was in 1931 with Hittin' the Trail for Hallelujah Land. That one is public domain. Sunday to Go Meetin' Time is not public domain. Clean Pastures is also not public domain. Uncle Tom's Bungalow is also not public domain. Jungle Jitters is public domain. The Isle of Pingo Pongo is not a public domain. All of This and Rabbit Stew is public domain. Coal Black and Decebin Dwarves, oh god, that just rolls off the tongue so badly. That one is thankfully not public domain. Tin Pan and Alley Cats is not public domain. Angel Puss is also not public domain. And the last one, Goldilocks and the, oh lord, and the Jivin' Bears is not public domain. Only 3 of the 11 are able to be stomached or reissued or censored heavily to exist today, but yeah, there's no way to unring the bell for some of these. But another censorship that made it incredibly difficult is the character Speedy Gonzales, who we all know and love for his hype and his fastness, but if you're looking for a representation Speedy wasn't the representation, and many Latino communities had cited their concerns that this is a harmful stereotype. So Cartoon Network listened, and in 1999 they expunged a lot of Speedy Gonzales cartoons just to make things respectful. But over time, there was a way to bring back the Speedy character in a better limelight in 2002, and since then, Speedy has gone through changes to make him more of a character that you want to see and is more than just a stereotype. And one of the entertainers that actually spoke up for many of these cartoons that had harmful stereotypes but didn't need to be expunged because there was still some greatness in there for the product of history that kept going forward, Whoopi Goldberg came to the defense. Yeah, I know, Whoopi. I know not a lot of people are very whoopee for Whoopi, but she did go out of her way to make special editions with the release of the Looney Tunes Golden Collection, where there was a disclaimer at the beginning of each DVD where she would explain that the cartoons are products of their time, and yes, they do contain things that definitely age like milk in the sun, but as she said, that they were wrong then, and they are wrong today, but editing them would be the same as denying that the stereotypes existed. You can't exactly expunge history, but you can't expunge everything because, well, they are here today because they made a lot of people laugh.
Unfortunately, at that time, racial and ethnic differences were caricatured in ways that may have embarrassed and even hurt people of color, women, and ethnic groups. Now, nobody intended it, but that's what happened. Now, some of the cartoons here reflect some of the prejudices that were commonplace in American society, especially when it came to the treatment of racial and ethnic minorities. Now, these jokes were wrong then, and they are wrong today. But removing these inexcusable images and jokes from this collection would be the same as saying they never existed. So they are presented here to accurately reflect a part of our history that cannot and should not be ignored.
Laugh, and there are good things about it. And you can't look at one mistake and not look at the many things that did go right. Well, there were many things that did go wrong, but still, the many of the success should outweigh the negatives that we've learned from. So to end my little lore video, to help you guys go to sleep, I have one last little lore tidbit that is the best for last. There's a short called Nighty Night Bugs, which is hands down an amazing one, with court jester Bugs racing against the Black Knight Yosemite Sam and his sneezing dragon in pursuit of the singing sword. It is the only Bugs Bunny cartoon to receive an Academy Award. You go on IMDb, it says the 6-minute show won an Oscar in 1958. That is quite amazing. Quite amazing. And this thing crams a lot into 6 minutes. Even references to its own previous work. The Errol Flynn cameo in Rabbit Hood, and the phrase that he does, sirloin of beef, that was used in Rabbit Hood by Boggs to calm the gullible sheriff of Nottingham, is in this one. It's kind of nice when there is some universe that does exist uniquely. And another phrase, Sir Osiris of the Liver, was used in Nightmare Hare. And the short has a similar premise to Sahara Hare, which features Bugs inside a building, and Sam is just trying to get on the inside to be an inside Sam. These Bugs versus Sam cartoons may seem like they kind of follow a same song and dance, but this one was how all their work really paid off to make something extremely unique, to follow the work of its predecessor, and to be so good that no other shorts ever got nominated for an Oscar. None of them. Truly, third time's the charm is the namesake here, because this was the third Oscar-nominated Bugs Bunny cartoon. A Wild Hare was nominated, Hiawatha's Rabbit Hunt was nominated, but it wasn't until 1958 when they finally won. And in time, they did make another reference to their Oscar win that became a surprisingly major plot point in Who Bopped Bugs Bunny in 1990. It's kind of a funny way to still make a reference of your win into a new way to entertain kids while still referencing your own proud history. And they were so damn proud of it, they had that be the opening to the Bugs Bunny show. Every week the announcer introduces that Oscar-winning rabbit, Bugs Bunny. it's kind of cool. You earned that Oscar, Bugs. You earned it. So this was a fun little tidbit to make, but if you would like to see more of these lore videos for sleep, then please let me know. Reach out to me at the Queen of the Screen and give me some recommendations. But until then, sleep well, and this is your Screen Queen, signing off. Good night.